Committee will come to order. This hearing is fully virtual, so we need to address a few housekeeping matters. Members are responsible for muting and unmuting themselves. For the purposes of eliminating inadvertent background noise, the chair or staff designated by the chair may mute participants' microphones when they are not under recognition. If I notice when you are recognized that you have not unmuted yourself, I will ask you if you would like the staff to unmute you. If you indicate approval by nodding, staff will unmute your microphone. We will begin with the chair and ranking member, then members present at the time the hearing is called to order will be recognized in order of seniority. We're using the 5-minute clock, which you will notice on your screen. It will show how much time is remaining. If there's a technology issue, we will move to the next member until the issue is resolved, and you will retain the balance of your time. Finally, in regard to adding extraneous or additional material to the record, per House rules, we have set up an email address where members can send anything they wish to submit for the record after seeking recognition for its inclusion. That email address has been provided in advance to your staff. I would like to welcome the Executive Director of the Office of Congressional Workplace Rights, Ms. Susan Grundmann, to present the fiscal year 2022 budget request. It is always a pleasure to be with you. The Office of Congressional Workplace Rights is responsible for administering the Congressional Accountability Act for the approximately 30,000 employees in the legislative branch. The mission of the office is to continue assisting the legislative branch community in creating and maintaining a workplace that is safe, accessible, and free from discrimination and other unlawful employment practices. You are not requesting an increase over the 7.5 million and 31 full-time employees provided last year. While your budget is not increasing, I understand that you plan to make cybersecurity improvements along with necessary IT system and network upgrades in line with government-wide security standards. These costs have been projected at $500,000. Since your budget is a zero-sum game, I hope you can explain where the savings are going to come from. I look forward to your testimony today. At this point, I would like to yield to my colleague and friend from the Pacific Northwest, the ranking member, Jamie Herrera Butler, for any opening comments she would like to make.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome back, Mrs. Grundmann. It's a pleasure to have you. The Office of Congressional Workplace Rights 2022 fiscal year request is $7.5 million, the same as FY21 enacted level. And after receiving funding increases over the last 2 years, we really appreciate the flat funding request. We're now approaching 2 years, excuse me, since the implementation of the CAA Reform Act, which greatly expanded your office's duties. In your office biennial report to Congress advocates for legislative action on 11 items, ranging from strengthening whistleblower protections to providing subpoena authority to extending protections to employees who serve on jury duty. So I look forward to hearing from you more about your progress on those initiatives and the budgetary impact of any legislative proposals, including your semi-annual report. Appreciate the work of you and your team to protect the rights of employees, assuring access for persons with disabilities, and educating our constituency on CAA's mandates. So I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Excellent. Thank you. Without objection, your written testimony, Ms. Grundmann, will be made part of the record. Please summarize your statements for the members of the committee. Once you finish your statement, we will move to the question and answer part of the hearing. You now have the floor.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Ryan, Ranking Member Herrera Butler, and other distinguished members of this committee. It's good to be back. It's great to see you, and it's good to be seen. On behalf of the Office of Congressional Workplace Rights, thank you for this opportunity to address your questions on our 2022 budget justification. When last we met, we were just barely 6 months into a new process, the administrative dispute process, that fully implemented on June 19th, 2019. And today, we continue under the Reform Act, but we do so while working remotely as a result of the pandemic. And like our sister offices, we make it work. Mediations and hearings continue in a virtual environment. Training and education continues via Zoom for Government, our new friend. And that particular aspect of our function has taken on increased significance because some employing offices have designated us for the purpose of their mandatory training. Safety and health and public accessibility meetings move forward. And when there are physical inspections required, our inspectors maintain social distancing, follow the guidelines of the CDC and the Office of Attending Physician. It's not business as usual, but it is business in our new norm. And in addition to our day-to-day mission, we also successfully launched and delivered the results for the first ever legislative-wide climate survey. The results we delivered were for the House and the Senate. And this includes questions about respondents' attitudes towards sexual harassment. This was somewhat of a monumental undertaking for our office because, as you know, we're very small. It took 4 people on staff, plus a contractor. The contractor had 5 people. Supported by the employing offices, we were able to reach 30,000 people in the legislative branch, both online and on paper. We issued proposed substantive regulations on paid parental leave, which provides for 12 weeks of paid leave in connection with the birth or replacement of a child. Following full public notice and comment, we are now working towards those final regulations that will be sent to you in the Senate later this year for congressional approval. We held our annual Mediators and Hearing Officers Summit to update them on trends that we have seen and take their feedback on issues that have arisen. We completed our biannual Occupational Safety and Health Report, which will be published once the security review is completed. Our public accessibility report is also completed and will be ready to deliver to you shortly. And as the ranking member mentioned, we have completed our recommendations to you on which laws that you have passed should also be made applicable to the legislative branch. We call this our 102B report, and that's the section that's referenced in the CAA. It has been published in the Congressional Record and is available online to us. On our website. And with our 2-year anniversary approaching, we do make recommendations to changes in the Reform Act process. We took stock of all the events that have occurred during the last 18 months and overhauled our strategic plan. What we created, we think, is a much more transparent, much more outward-facing plan that will give you a roadmap of where we plan to go in the next 5 years. In terms of appropriations, let me spot a couple of trends for you. As we predicted last year, costs for hearing officers have dramatically increased. In fact, they've more than tripled over the last year. And that's due to, as we predicted, more employing offices coming within our jurisdiction, more categories of employees, and due to changes in our process. And while our process has changed, and while we continue to work remotely, some things that haven't changed is the volume work that we still have. We are seeing that our spending is not tied to a fiscal year. Certainly cases can span more than a fiscal year, and inspections that involve specialized expertise can span several years. So without asking for more money, we're asking for more time to spend it. As always, we credit the men and women who work tirelessly to meet our mission while striving towards our vision, which is a respectful, safe, healthy, and accessible congressional workplace with equal opportunity and treatment for all. Thanks to this committee's constant support, we achieved our funding request for fiscal year 2021, and we are not asking for more money in 2022 or additional FTE. I thank you for the privilege of your time, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Great, thank you for your testimony. We're going to move to the question and answer, and we will begin with the distinguished gentlewoman from the state of Washington, Ms. Herrera Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The first thing I want to ask about, Ms. Grundman, is the last year's hearing we were discussing the role of your office in implementation of the new 12-week paid parental leave that is available to legislative employees, which went into effect last year in October. Could you fill us in on efforts on the implementation of the rules associated with that policy, and what's your office doing to inform House offices and employees about the new policy?
Absolutely. There's tons of information on our website. We have gone through that public notice and comment period we see, and we generally, when we do this, we receive a lot of intelligent guidance from the employing offices. Some of the opinions that have been received are diametrically opposed, so we're working towards reconciling them currently with our board.
What do you mean? Like someone saying, hey, we don't like this?
Well, it's more than it's a really complicated piece of legislation that you passed. And in terms of how the 12 weeks is tracked, that depends on, how much annual leave, whether you can assert that annual leave, how many kids. So there are a lot of different scenarios, and we've tried to play out those scenarios in some guidance on our website. The comment period has closed. We are working towards final regulations. We hope to have them out soon. Once they are completed, they will be sent to you. You will have to pass them into law for your congressional approval, because they are they're substantive regulations as opposed to the procedural regulations that we have the authority to promulgate.
So help me understand, because I thought we passed it last October.
You did.
It's not effective yet? Is that what you're saying?
It is effective. It is effective, but in order for us to create the framework in the congressional community, we have to pass substantive regulations, bring them to you for your passage. So the law is effective, but how it's going to be implemented is in these substantive regulations.
There are offices pushing back saying they're not providing this, correct?
They should be. They should be.
It's just providing. I'm a little unclear about providing. Obviously, it's not as cut and dry as you have a baby, adopt a baby, or get a baby placed, and then you take your 12 weeks.
Right.
Is that because of the different type, not necessarily congressional offices, but the different types of offices across, because this is all federal employees? Is that part of this? Or is it just you're looking at federal employees and some employing offices are, questioning it?
They shouldn't be questioning. This particular piece of legislation is just for the legislative branch, so it's unique.
Yeah.
Actually, it's landmark. It's huge. You've gone over and above what's happening in the executive branch. And it's just reconciling the different kinds of comments. When you see the final document, as you've seen with our procedural regulations in the past, we do explain every move that we make. We talk about the comments and why we've accepted them, or why we've tried to reconcile them with other comments. And generally, all the employing offices, your counsel, sends us something. I believe OHEC also sent us something as well.
Okay. Thank you. With my time left, I wanted to prioritize here. The workplace rights training. So we are CAO spends millions of dollars to contract out for the workplace rights training for members and staff, and your staff also does workplace rights training. Would it be beneficial for the House to explore working with your agency to have OCWR lead the required trainings? If conversations are like that are already taking place, I'd like to know about it. But it just seems like that might be an efficiency or simplification that we could benefit from.
We would love to do it. And I think we talk about this every year. This is something we do have a great deal of interest in. With the funding and the FTE that you gave us last year, we were able to retain 2 full-time educators on our staff. Those educators not only have training in the CAA, but it's over and above. They carry certificates with respect to unconscious bias, which is our #1 module in demand. Those certificates actually come from Cornell University. They will work with all employing offices in terms of developing strategies, scenarios that fit your that fit the environment that you work in. So in shorthand answer is yes, we're very interested.
Okay. We should follow up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Up next is the distinguished gentlewoman from Massachusetts, Ms. Clark.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Director Grundman, for being with us here today. As we've discussed in past hearings, I'm very interested in concerned about the instances of sexual harassment and discrimination in our congressional workplace. And I appreciate all your efforts to implement the provisions of the Reform Act to address this problem. I know this has been a tumultuous year, to put it lightly, but I'm hoping that you can update me in progress that has been made, and also if you can specifically address the climate survey. Were you able to get the response rate up? And are there any weaknesses in the handling of sexual assault that you feel you've been able to address and make improvements on? So sorry for the triple question in one question.
All right, let me see if I can break it apart. In terms of the climate survey, the statute requires that we deliver the results to 3 particular committees, and that's CHA, Senate Rules, and Homeland Security and Government Affairs. The actual survey itself, keep in mind that it is a baseline. It is a snapshot in time, so there really isn't anything to compare it to at this point in time. The comparison will come when we re-administer the survey next year. In terms of results for the legislative community, we are completing the reports for the other employing offices. The House and the Senate have been completed. The House did very well. You set the baseline very high. In terms of the next step in training, we are looking at training over and above the baseline of the law, because if you just train on the letter of the law itself, you really haven't gotten to the underlying behaviors that can cause discrimination, that can lead to a hostile work environment. So for that reason, we've branched out. We've done the implicit bias module, which is available to you right now. And in fact, we have had discussions with the CAO in terms of loading our materials onto your website so that you can have access to them directly, and that it can be tracked through your through the CAO as well. So that's the first step. The second step is, we want to work directly with your offices in terms of tailoring training specifically to your needs. And a good example of this is, let's talk about last summer and the death of George Floyd. In the wake of his passing, in the wake of his death, we were asked to develop and deliver modules on racial equity, on civility, and on inclusion. And those requests are still coming into this day. So I would encourage you to reach out to our office and set something up. Training is our cornerstone. It is preventative in nature, and it is the way to go.
Oh, thank you so much for that. And can you tell me a little bit about the response rate and how that went? Did you see improvements?
It's not, because this is the baseline, there's nothing to compare it to, but in terms of the House's response rate, it was very good. You were well within the margin of error.
Okay, excellent. I also wonder if you could update me on the alternative dispute resolution program. Last time we spoke, it was just 6 months into taking effect, and I'm hoping you can give me a better sense, a year and a half in, about how things are progressing. Have you noticed significant number of cases increased, or has the pandemic just not seeing the progress you might have hoped for?
Let me parse that out. In terms of changes, there are some trends that we've seen. One, mediation is down, but we expected that because mediation is now voluntary. Two, there are more requests for administrative hearings because with mediation being voluntary, the only option is adjudication, and there's a much shorter time frame for employees to request that hearing. They only have 10 days. 3, case processing times are also shorter now because the employee is pretty much in adjudication on day 1. In terms of the types of issues we're seeing, they're the same types of issues that we've seen before. Discrimination, mostly based on race and color. Retaliation as well. In terms of caseload, that's a difficult question to answer. Let me see if I can get to it succinctly. We don't count cases the same way as we did under the old system. So if you saw in our statement, I think we gave you this. Under the old system, we counted cases before they reached adjudication. So if you look at our past, we had, a number of cases coming in through, quote, counseling, and then a steep drop off to the filing of a complaint before a hearing officer. Now this is the reverse. The employee comes in, they're before a preliminary review hearing officer pretty much on day one, which is the rise in costs in terms of hearing officers. So we can't count cases the same way anymore because there are really no two equivalents. In terms of the workload, it's still the same. One more thing to note, the Reform Act created a confidential advisor, and she is at the beginning of our process. She is receiving calls directly from employees in the legislative branch with questions, with concerns, at the same rate as she was receiving before the pandemic. So in terms of workload, it really hasn't changed for us despite working remotely.
Great, thank you. I see my time has expired. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Next is the distinguished gentleman from Nevada, Mr. Amadei.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. You guys have done a pretty good job of covering my stuff, so I'll yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Amadei. Next is the distinguished gentleman from Hawaii, Mr. Case.
Good morning, Ms. Grundman. We shared a common experience, law school. One of my professors taught me that lawyers that don't read footnotes starve. So I did read your footnote in your submission that says here, I'm just reading it, approximately 800,000 or 12% of your general expenses budget remained unexpended at the end of FY20. Okay, that was FY20, right? So what happened to that? Was that carried over? And do you have the same issue this year?
That's precisely why we're asking for an increase in the carryover. We don't want more money. We just need more time to spend it. We are starting to see that our spending is really not tied to the fiscal year. We don't control the number of cases that come in. We don't control the number of requests for investigations or inspections that come into our OSH program and our public accessibility program. So that's the key. And so you're actually seeing hard evidence of why we're looking for a larger carryover.
Okay, and then you say here that this is attributable, at least in part, to the closure of the workplace. So the reason I'm asking this question is because some of the other folks that have testified to us have actually seen general expenses go up during COVID-19. And so, they have reasons for why that happened. Why generally did yours go down? I mean, you still had a physical presence, you still had personnel. Was that because the cases themselves went down as a result of the closure of the workplace?
Not necessarily that, but the publication expenses that we generally have, we usually hard copy things. We don't do that anymore. Our board consists of attorneys around the country, and they travel in for board meetings. Their travel was canceled this year, so that's a partial attribution. But we talk about those costs going down. At the same time, we have costs going up, and we're talking about specifically the hearing officers. That's more than three times more than we spent last year. So right. One hand goes up, the other hand goes down. Yep.
Okay, and that was kind of my next question. When you talk about hearing officers, why did they go up 3 times? That wasn't like their rate went up 3 times. That was just the utilization went up that much.
Exactly, because it's all attributable to 3 things. The first is more employing offices within our jurisdiction, as we predicted last year. The second is more categories of employees. And the third really is that change in our process. If you recall, under the old process, the hearing officer didn't enter the picture until the very end of the process. And we only had maybe 3 to 5 cases involving a hearing officer in any year under the old system. In the new system, the hearing officer is there pretty much on day one, undergoing a preliminary review of the employee's claim within the first 30 days of the filing of that claim. So it's very intense. The hearing officer also shows up at the end of the case for a merits review. So it's not surprising that this has happened.
Okay. And then I wanted to pick up on a comment that the chair made in his opening remarks to the effect of cybersecurity, because that was one of the major recommendations out of the GAO, was that you increase your cybersecurity capacity. And so, and you have responded to the GAO on that, but it's unfinished business. And so I'm just curious why, whether the complete response on cybersecurity does or doesn't require more resources. It looks like, from your perspective, at least this fiscal year, no. But you know, I mean, we've all got to up our cybersecurity game.
Yes. So as you know, we work very closely with the Library of Congress for cybersecurity. In fact, we're heavily dependent on them. We have satisfied all their concerns. The system is undergoing continuous monitoring. So the costs are steady. They're really basically expenses that we owe the library. And so we can predict where they're coming. In terms of upgrading, that's where we are. It's one day at a time. The next phase we're looking for, and that's certainly in our budget justification, is we're talking about migrating our occupational safety and health and public accessibility findings into the system, also covered by the library.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Sure, thank you.
Mr. Case. Next is the distinguished gentleman from Washington State, Mr. Newhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Ms. Grunman, for testifying today. Like many of the offices that this committee oversees, the work of the Office of Workplace Rights is probably an understatement, but has changed significantly over the past year. Not only the definition of workplace has changed, but also how folks can communicate, and unfortunately, the instances where your office gets involved, I'm assuming, has also changed and evolved. So I'm just curious how some of your training maybe has changed to reflect some of these new realities that I hope are not permanent, but certainly we're dealing with them today.
Absolutely, and you hit it right on the nail, the hammer right on the nail. Excuse my analogy.
I know what you mean.
But again, the environment has changed. We are seeing more modules, the development from in-person training to as online training. In addition to that, we are training scenarios, also include scenarios that are based on virtual environments and working remotely. And then again, we talk about what happened last summer. That the nature of our work has changed. We're talking more about preventative measures. We're talking about bystander intervention. We're talking about implicit bias. We're talking about addressing, the tension in terms of the workplace of racial equity, civility, inclusion. Those are the types of issues that employing offices are bringing to us now. And again, back to our two educators, they're fabulous. They're certified in this stuff. And they can tailor a training to address a specific situation in your office or a generalized situation. And we know this from experience, that employing offices have all different dynamics. And so the dynamic that we train in one office may not work for the other. So there's a lot of work that goes in on the front end, kind of working with this office. What do you want to hear? What do you need to hear? And what situations do you need addressed? It's very, very personalized to each particular group of people.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that, and look forward to continuing to work with you. And I know you've got a difficult road. I appreciate your dedication to making things as workable as possible. So thank you very much for being with us today. And I'll yield back my time, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Newhouse. Next is the distinguished gentlewoman from Virginia, Ms. Wexton.
Thank you, Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And it's great to meet you, Director Grunman, albeit virtually. Thank you for joining us here today. I want to follow up a little bit more on some of the questions that my colleagues have had about this climate survey, because the statute indicates that it needs to be performed every 2 years and that it will include a module on or questions on sexual harassment and sexual, assault type questions, but that's a minimum. And so I'm just curious whether you have any plans to ask other questions about other things. You're talking about racial equity and things of that nature, maybe the impacts of January 6th or working remotely on people. Because, I think that it's great that some offices are coming to you proactively and asking for help with modules on those topics, but not all offices are going to do that, and not all staff are going to be that forthcoming maybe to their member or to their chief. So do you have any plans to expand the scope of those surveys?
So the statute requires that we consult with CHA, Senate Rules, Homeland Security and Government Affairs in the Senate with regards to methodologies and procedures. And in that context, it's also the content as well. So what we will do for the next cycle of surveys is we will propose changes. We will add questions. I can reasonably see adding a series of questions on how the pandemic was handled. Did offices do well? Were people prepared? In terms of what we saw last summer, definitely that area can be beefed up. But this, again, is a baseline. So we're asking about employees' knowledge about what they personally experienced, what they saw. If they saw it or they experienced it, do they know what to do next? Those are the types of questions in the baseline. So from there on, we have to keep some of the same questions to continue to monitor the growth in the baseline, but we can add additional questions next go round. And the timing of your question is impeccable, because as we're wrapping up this first round of surveys, we're actually starting on the second survey now to be delivered next year.
Okay, so what does it entail for your office to come up with those new questions? And in addition to consulting with those committees that you mentioned that are in the statute, what else does it entail for you guys to come up with these questions and decide, what methodology you're going to use for those questions?
So in terms of the methodology, we're talking about the delivery of the survey itself, because the statute requires that the survey be anonymous and confidential, which are two difficult things, which is how the survey was issued last time. In terms of the content, we would, we're watching, we're learning, we're thinking of the things that people have said, people have told us in terms of our confidential advising, the themes that we're seeing, and we can reach out to into those themes. And you've seen these surveys before. You ask a question, strongly agree, neither, strongly, that's the type of questions. They're not open-ended questions. The areas that we covered during the last survey are the same across the legislative branch: discrimination, sexual harassment, retaliation. We talk about a reasonable accommodation as well. Those are areas of interest to these particular committee members. And I said, and again, the pandemic has really changed the dynamic of the workforce, not only in our community, but throughout the country, throughout the world. So those types of questions will actually be included this time, and we'll see if the committees agree with us.
Great. I understand that you're still just getting started on this process, and you have the one survey under your belt and you're working on the next one. Do you have any thoughts on whether this could become an annual thing?
Under the statute, it's a biennial. If you want to make it an annual survey, then we'd have to change the statute.
Okay.
And really, it's tied to the Congress. It's tied to each Congress. It is a monumental undertaking, that much I can tell you. But we've learned some good lessons, and I think it's going to be a lot tighter, sounder next time.
Great. Well, I hope it will be a little bit less monumental every time you do one. So thank you very much for your responses and for everything that you're doing. And with that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Wexton. I appreciate this. The committee has covered a lot of the main areas. I have one final question I'd like to ask. In December of 19, as you know, the GAO conducted a study of the OCWR management practices to fully implement the statutory requirements of the CAA Reform Act. They are finalizing their strategic plan for 2021 to 2026. Has COVID-19 in January 6th changed the strategic plan at all?
We started working on the strategic plan last summer. So it was all pretty much done remotely. What you will see in the strategic plan are particular action items that are really related to working remotely. In terms of post-January 6th, there are a number of things that we're doing that are outside the strategic plan. And that is, we're going to be looking at emergency action plans. We're going to be looking at escape hoods. And we are also going to be looking in terms of keeping the police officers safe in public demonstrations, and safe includes their mental well-being as well. Also, in addition to outside the strategic plan, because it's still a very dynamic environment that we're living in, we are putting on a brown bag in about 2 weeks. You are invited, and we're going to talk about the mental health issues about working through a pandemic and now returning to work gradually.
That's great. Are you, with that, are you interfacing with the House Office of Wellbeing that we started, the wellness office here? We should at least get you connected so you're, you know about each other, and you know some of the work they're doing.
That's great. I mean, we've communicated with the CAO. They've been very supportive of our work, and we will continue to do so. That would be wonderful. Thank you.
Okay. Well, our staff will make sure you get connected to Brian over there. I think that'd be important relationship for you guys to cultivate.
Okay.
With that, if anybody has a final question for the good of the order. All right. Well, thank you, Ms. Grundman. We appreciate all your great work, and look forward to watching what transpires here over the next year. So thank you so much.
Great.
This
Thank
hearing
you.
is adjourned.
Thank you.